Have you ever felt a deep sadness inside, without knowing where it came from? A sense of loneliness, of loss, of something precious that slipped away, yet you can't quite remember what it was. Have you ever met someone completely unfamiliar, yet their eyes felt achingly familiar, as if you had once known them beyond time? Or have you lived through a series of repeated events, patterns of pain and struggle that return again and again, no matter how good you are, how hard you try, how much you give? There are things in life that logic alone cannot explain. Sometimes, injustice strikes those who live with the most kindness. Sometimes, those who harm others walk away unscathed, wealthy, admired, untouched. If life begins and ends in just this one existence, then where is justice? But if justice doesn't always arrive in this lifetime, perhaps it's waiting in another. The Buddha once taught that karma doesn't begin with birth, and it doesn't end with death. It follows us like a shadow, not to punish, but to teach. What you are going through today may be the result of something you once did, once thought, once spoke, long before this lifetime, before you wore this body, before you had this name. Before becoming an enlightened being, the Buddha was not born a saint. He lived through hundreds, even thousands of lifetimes, in countless forms. An elephant wandering deep forests, a deer who guided the lost, a poor man who gave away his last bowl of porridge and died alone, a wise sage who was killed for telling the truth, a father who lost his child in a moment of rage. They are mirrors held up to the soul, showing how a being moves from ignorance to awareness, from selfishness to compassion, from hatred to liberation. You don't need to believe in reincarnation to feel the truth of what's to come. Sometimes, we don't need memories of past lives to sense that we've been here before. All we need to do is look at the present, the things that hurt us, the people who return, the patterns that echo through our experiences. These are the footprints of karma, not imposed from the outside, but generated from within. The most beautiful thing in the Buddha's teaching is this: karma is not fixed. It can be transformed. No one is forever trapped in their mistakes. No wrongdoing is beyond redemption. If what you live today is the fruit of the past, then what you choose today becomes the seed of your future. Even if you've fallen, even if you've failed, you can begin again, with understanding, with sincerity, with the quiet resolve not to repeat the same suffering. In the 60 minutes that follow, you will hear some of the most powerful stories from the Buddha's past lives, stories of karma, of perseverance, of transformation. They are not moral lessons. They do not preach. They simply reflect. In them, you may find a part of yourself. In your anger, in your quiet acts of goodness, in your longing for justice, in the pain you carry that no one sees. In the hope that something, anything, might finally make sense. And if the Buddha, who once struggled and stumbled just like us, could transform all of it into awakening, then perhaps that path still exists. Perhaps it is still open, still waiting. The only question is, are you ready to remember? Karma Unfolded. The Buddha's teachings through his past lives. Part 1. The timeless journey of a soul toward enlightenment. 1.1. Why does Buddhism speak of past lives? When we look at a newborn baby crying for the first time, the world often sees a beginning, a blank slate, an untainted soul. But in Buddhism, life doesn't begin with the first breath, nor does it end with the last. Every sentient being is a point along an endless current of rebirths, and each soul, regardless of form or circumstance, continues to walk a path shaped by its own past, stretching across countless lifetimes. This is why in Buddhism, but mirrors that reflect the truths of karma, cause and effect, and the gradual ripening of a soul toward awakening. In particular, the many lifetimes of the Buddha before his enlightenment serve as powerful testimony. Before becoming the awakened one, he lived through hundreds, even thousands of lives, embodying diverse forms, facing joy and suffering, to cultivate compassion, wisdom, and the strength to transcend the cycle of birth and death. These stories are preserved in a body of texts known as the Jataka tales, or the stories of the Buddha's previous lives. In the Theravada tradition, there are 547 stories, each recounting a different incarnation of the Bodhisattva Siddhartha before he attained Buddhahood. In one life, he was a noble elephant protecting his herd in the deep forest. In another, a hermit sacrificing himself for truth. In yet another, A poor man willing to give his last morsel to a stranger. Each life contains a fragment of a larger truth, and together, they form the path that leads to enlightenment. The Jataka tales are not meant to entertain. They are not just spiritual folklore. Each one is a vivid illustration of karma in action. In one life, the Bodhisattva sows the seed of compassion and reaps trust in future lives. In another, a single moment of anger leads to consequences he must later redeem through selfless love and sacrifice. These stories were not meant to glorify Siddhartha, but to help us understand. Enlightenment is not a divine gift. It is the fruit of lifetimes of intentional, conscious effort. In today's world, where spirituality often gets lost in a maze of distractions, the notion of past lives can seem superstitious or irrational. But when we listen with the heart rather than the analytical mind, these stories begin to speak to something deeper. They remind us that nothing in life is truly random. What we call misfortune, karma, or serendipity all have roots, even if we can't remember them. The wonder of the Buddha's teaching lies in this. No matter how far one has strayed across lifetimes, no matter how much negative karma one has accumulated, the moment of awakening is always available. In every Jataka tale, no matter how tragic or difficult, there is always an undercurrent of transformation, pointing toward liberation. And that path is not reserved for saints or sages. It is open to anyone willing to look inward, understand their patterns, and choose a different way. In the next section, we will journey deeper into these lifetimes, into the small moments that, though seemingly insignificant, shaped the great turning of the wheel toward awakening. Because the truth is, each of us is writing our own Jataka. Every day, every decision, every intention adds a new line to the long scripture of our karmic becoming. 1. 2. The Buddha was not born enlightened. When people see the image of the Buddha sitting in perfect stillness beneath the Bodhi tree, eyes gently closed, mind unmoved, they often assume that enlightenment came to him in an instant, as if divinely bestowed. But according to Buddhist teachings, no awakening happens by accident. No one is born a Buddha. Even Siddhartha Gautama, the historical Buddha, was once an ordinary being, bound by ignorance and karma, who walked the long, winding path through countless lifetimes before reaching full realization. The stories in the Jataka tales are not just spiritual fables. They open a vast and humbling perspective that enlightenment is not a sudden gift, but the culmination of lifetimes of learning, unlearning, sacrifice, and spiritual perseverance. In these tales, the Buddha-to-be was at times a deer, a noble elephant, a tiny bird. He lived as animals, not as punishment, but as lessons in selflessness, loyalty, and compassion. Even in the most humble forms, he was learning what it meant to protect others, to give without condition, to love without self. As he moved through human lives, he continued to take on diverse roles. A poor man who lived in quiet generosity, a merchant who gave up all his wealth to save others, a king who renounced his throne upon realizing the impermanence of power, a sage who meditated in the wilderness and guided others in silence. Each role, each identity, was a fragment of his soul's unfolding. Some lives were full of virtue, others were marked by error. He felt anger. He made mistakes. But even his failures were part of the journey, because how can one truly understand the suffering of others without having suffered deeply oneself? This, in itself, is a profound teaching. A Buddha is not a chosen one, nor a supernatural being. A Buddha is a state of mind, a mind that has been purified of ignorance and fully awakened to the nature of reality. The historical Buddha is revered not because he was different from us, but because he shows us what is possible for all of us. His story is not one of divine favor, but of determination, discipline, and the enduring vow to awaken, not for oneself alone, but for all beings. Each life was a step forward, sometimes small, sometimes vast, but always meaningful. As an animal, he learned sacrifice. As a king, he learned responsibility. As a beggar, he learned humility. Piece by piece, through joy and sorrow, the path took shape. There was no miracle, no shortcut, only intention, only practice, only the quiet power of a vow carried across lifetimes. That's why in Buddhism, the image of an enlightened being is not meant to distance us. It is not meant to make us feel small. It is a mirror, showing us our own potential. The Buddha was once like us, confused, reactive, striving. He had to learn, just like we do. And if he could walk that path all the way to its end, so can we. The question is not whether we are capable, but whether we are committed. Can we pause and look inward? Can we stay with discomfort long enough to understand it? Can we choose healing over blame, presence over distraction? The Buddha's answer was given not in words, but in actions, across hundreds of lives. He didn't preach enlightenment. He lived it, moment by moment, through failure and triumph, through silence and service. And in doing so, he left behind not just teachings, but a living map of transformation. Understanding that awakening is the fruit of lifetimes allows us to release the pressure of perfection. We stop trying to become someone overnight. We begin to value the small steps, the quiet efforts, the subtle changes in our own hearts. And perhaps, instead of racing towards some imagined ideal, we start to live this moment a little more kindly, a little more honestly. Because maybe, just maybe, this life is one of many that are preparing us for the moment when something within us truly blossoms. Part 2. Decoding Karma, Rebirth, and the Journey of the Soul. 2. 1. The concepts of rebirth and karma. If there is one way in which Buddhism views life differently from the modern world, it lies in how it understands time and existence. Most people see life as a straight line. We are born, we grow up, we work, and we die. End of story. But through the lens of the Buddha's teaching, life is not a short, linear path. It is a circle, an endless cycle that turns over and over again, with no clear beginning and no definitive end. This is samsara, the wheel of birth and death, which every being is caught in, often without even realizing it. Rebirth is not a punishment. It is not imposed by some higher power. It is simply the natural consequence of karma, the energy created by our thoughts, words, and actions. In Buddhism, karma is often misunderstood as a kind of divine justice or cosmic payback. But in truth, karma is not judgment, it is cause. Every time we act, we plant a seed. That seed doesn't just disappear. It remains in the continuum of our consciousness. And when the right conditions arise, when conditions, dian, meet the cause, nan, the result, qua, naturally comes to fruition. This is the foundation of the Buddhist principle of cause, condition, effect, nan, dian, qua. A harsh word spoken today may be the cause. A tense situation next week may be the condition. The result could be conflict, misunderstanding, or pain. Conversely, a small act of kindness now may quietly blossom into comfort, trust, or unexpected grace in the future. The important truth is this: not all results come immediately. Some fruit ripens in days, some in years, and others lie dormant across lifetimes. And because karma doesn't simply vanish, rebirth continues. When the body dies, the subtle stream of consciousness, carrying all our karmic imprints, continues into a new life, shaped by everything we have thought, said, and done. If the mind is clouded, rebirth may occur in a realm of suffering. If the mind is pure, it may be reborn in a realm of peace. Rebirth is not random. It is the direct continuation of karma. Like a cart rolling downhill, it won't stop unless something intervenes. Without mindfulness and wisdom, the cycle just keeps spinning again and again. That is why the Buddhist texts often compare samsara to a wheel that turns as long as craving, ignorance, and attachment continue to fuel it. Each time we act out of anger, fear, or selfish desire, we give that wheel more momentum. It spins not because someone pushes it for us, but because we keep it turning ourselves. Every moment of hatred adds another rotation. Every blind reaction deepens the track. And every time we repeat unconscious habits, we remain trapped in the loop. But Buddhism does not speak of rebirth and karma to frighten us. These teachings are meant to awaken us, to show that there is another way. The path begins with understanding, knowing that our present actions are shaping not just this life, but what lies beyond. That nothing happening today is truly accidental. Every joy, every sorrow, is part of a larger pattern, woven from past intentions, some remembered, some forgotten. With this awareness, we no longer blame fate or others for our suffering. We begin to look inward. We learn to live with greater care, mindful of what we think, say, and do. We begin to realize that even if we've planted unskillful seeds in the past, we are not doomed. Karma is not fixed. It can be purified, transformed, rewritten, if we are willing to live with mindfulness, compassion, and responsibility. This is how the cycle can stop. This is how we begin to step off the wheel. With each moment of clarity, each act of kindness, each choice to let go rather than cling, we are no longer spinning in circles. We are walking, step by step, toward freedom. 2. How does the soul evolve through many lifetimes? In Buddhist thought, the soul is not seen as a fixed, eternal self that remains unchanged across time. Instead, each being is a continuous stream of consciousness, ever-changing, ever-moving, shaped and propelled by the karma it has accumulated. When the body dies, this stream of consciousness does not end. It carries within it every imprint of thought, word, and deed, both wholesome and unwholesome, and moves on into a new life, a new form. And from there, it continues, learning, stumbling, transforming, and rising again and again in a long and hopeful journey of inner evolution. This spiritual evolution is not about gaining worldly intelligence or power. It is about the gradual purification of the heart and mind. It is the long arc that moves from ignorance to wisdom, from instinct to awareness, from selfishness to universal compassion. In the earliest lifetimes, consciousness may manifest in lower forms, animals, insects, or primal life, not as punishment, but because the mind at that stage is still ruled by basic survival instincts. It has not yet developed the capacity for moral reflection or spiritual awakening. But even in those forms, the seed of enlightenment is quietly present. As experience accumulates, the soul may eventually be reborn as a human. This is a pivotal moment in the journey. Only in human form does consciousness possess the full capacity to distinguish between right and wrong, suffering and liberation. Only as a human can one reflect, choose, regret, forgive, and change direction. Yet simply being human does not guarantee progress. There are human lives ruled by ignorance, greed, hatred, lives lived no differently than that of beasts. Still, it is in these human lives that the soul begins to awaken, to recognize that pain has meaning, that karma is real, and that suffering is not a punishment, but a teacher. Gradually, the soul begins to take responsibility. It starts to observe its thoughts and actions. It begins to understand cause and effect, not as abstract ideas, but as living truths. With time, the soul learns to feel compassion for others, even for those who have caused harm. Every lesson, every insight becomes another step upward. From an ordinary human filled with craving and confusion, the soul begins to transform into someone with moral discipline, inner clarity, and a heart inclined towards service. When selfishness gives way to selflessness, when instinct gives way to insight, a bodhisattva begins to emerge. A bodhisattva is not some distant, mythical figure. A bodhisattva can be anyone who lives with the deep aspiration to alleviate the suffering of others. At this stage, the soul is no longer concerned with personal gain, but with the liberation of all beings. A bodhisattva may take birth as a teacher, a doctor, a mother, a laborer, or even someone unknown to the world, yet in every role, they quietly plant seeds of healing and peace. Through countless lifetimes of such dedication, as ignorance dissolves and wisdom blossoms, the soul eventually reaches the highest state, Buddhahood. To become a Buddha is not to gain a title. It is not to escape to heaven. It is to fully and completely let go of all attachments, all illusions, and all karmic residues. A Buddha sees things as they truly are, impermanent, interdependent, empty of inherent self. And in this seeing, there is no more struggle. There is no more rebirth. There is only peace, the peace that comes not from escaping life, but from understanding it so deeply that nothing can disturb the stillness within. Thus, from a small, instinct-driven being to a fully awakened one, the soul rises, not through accumulation, but through release. Not by conquering the world, but by mastering the self. Each life is a stepping stone. Each hardship, a hidden blessing. Each moment of awakening, a light on the path. And no matter how long the journey takes, no matter how many lives are needed, as long as one does not give up, every soul can, one day, reach the light. 2.3 Real-life reflections in the modern world. Although the concepts of karma and rebirth originate from ancient Eastern wisdom, more and more phenomena in modern life, some mysterious, some deeply moving, are prompting even the scientific world to wonder, could it be that we have lived before? Is each of us part of a much longer journey than this one lifetime suggests? One of the most striking examples is the appearance of child prodigies. We've seen children who, without any formal training, can play the piano like seasoned musicians, paint like masters, or speak languages they've never studied. Some children show deep spiritual insight from a very young age, understanding complex teachings or showing extraordinary kindness and wisdom. These cases go far beyond genetics or environment. From a Buddhist perspective, such abilities are not random gifts, but seeds planted in past lives, a continuation of effort, dedication, and spiritual merit accumulated over lifetimes. Similarly, some individuals seem to possess an innate spiritual sensitivity. They have heightened intuition, a natural sense of empathy, or even healing abilities. These people are often quiet, humble, and drawn to service, not out of ego, but from a deep inner calling. Buddhism explains these tendencies as the residue of past spiritual cultivation. Perhaps they were monks, sages, or hermits in previous lives who lived with deep mindfulness and purity. These karmic imprints carry over, not as ego-boosting powers, but as natural inclinations toward compassion and wisdom. Then there are the strange, unexplainable encounters, those moments when we meet someone for the first time and feel an immediate sense of familiarity, as if we've known them forever. There are relationships that seem destined, a glance across a room, a chance meeting on a street, that somehow changes the course of our life. Sometimes it's a soul connection, sometimes a painful bond, but whether it brings joy or sorrow, it always transforms us. In Buddhist terms, these are old karmic threads resurfacing, the unfinished debts and connections of past lives seeking resolution in the present. People fall in love instantly, only to part in heartbreak. Others cross paths just long enough to help one another through a difficult phase, and then gently drift apart. From a worldly view, it may seem random or romantic, but from the lens of karma, these are ripened seeds of past life vows, promises, or unresolved ties, now blooming into new experiences, sometimes for healing, sometimes for closure. Even our suffering, illness, betrayal, loss, is not necessarily bad luck. Often, it's past karma returning, not to punish, but to awaken. Pain can become a profound teacher if we choose to listen. It invites us inward, to reflect, to shift, to grow. And the moment we stop seeing everything as accidental and start recognizing the deeper layers of cause and effect, we begin to live more consciously, more compassionately. What's most powerful is this: no matter what karma returns, we always have the power to choose our response. A person who once caused harm, if awake enough, can stop and begin to live with compassion. A person who suffers, if wise enough, can choose to forgive instead of retaliate. Samsara continues only when we act from ignorance. But the will can stop when we act from mindfulness. When we see this clearly, we stop fearing karma, and we stop blaming it. Instead, we live like mindful gardeners, planting wholesome seeds each day, tending to the soil of our hearts with care and kindness, and watching closely the returning patterns, not with fear, but with understanding. In what seems like a random moment, karma is offering a question. And the question is always, this time, what will you choose? Part 3. Lives of Selflessness. When the Buddha was an animal or an ordinary man. 3. 1. The elephant who gave his life for the herd. Deep in a lush tropical forest, where the sound of birds echoed through ancient trees and the river ran clear and wild, there once lived a herd of elephants who moved through the seasons in quiet harmony. But leading this herd was no ordinary elephant, towering in stature and calm in demeanor. The leader had eyes that glowed not just with strength, but with wisdom and compassion. What few knew was that this was one of the Buddha's past lives, long before his enlightenment, when he lived not as a human, but as an elephant, already walking the path of selfless love. This elephant king cared for his herd like a devoted parent. He watched over the young, protected the weak, and made sure every member found food and water during the long dry season. One year, the drought came early and fiercely. The rivers began to dry up, and the trees bore no fruit. The herd was forced to journey across unfamiliar, treacherous terrain in search of life-sustaining water. It was then, while passing through a narrow ravine filled with swamps and hidden dangers, that disaster struck. Calves became stuck in the mud, mothers grew weak with thirst, and fear spread through the herd. But the Elephant King did not panic. He studied the terrain, listened to the wind, and acted with resolve. Using his tusks, he cleared fallen trees. With his massive body, he stomped paths through the mire. When the way forward became impassable, he stood tall against the cliff walls, using his back as a bridge for others to cross. His skin was torn, his legs bruised, blood streaked his gray hide, but his eyes remained calm, focused only on ensuring the safety of his herd. And when the final elephant reached the lush valley beyond, where water flowed and green leaves danced in the breeze, he collapsed quietly at the edge of the stream, his body broken, his spirit at peace. This tale, found in the ancient Jataka texts, is not simply a moving fable. It is a profound teaching on selflessness, on the rare and noble courage to live not for oneself, but for others. When the Buddha lived as that elephant, he didn't see his own survival as the highest goal. What mattered more was the safety and well-being of the entire herd, the collective. Selflessness isn't just about heroic moments. It's a way of being, a willingness to prioritize the needs of others when it matters most. The elephant didn't weigh pros and cons, didn't ask who would remember or reward him. He acted out of pure compassion. He saw suffering and responded. And in doing so, he sowed the seeds of immense merit, not because he sought it, but because he embodied it. In today's world, we're often taught to protect our own interests, to compete, to rise above others. But this story whispers something different. Sometimes, it is in giving ourselves that we discover the highest expression of our humanity. A single act of sincere compassion can create powerful karma, a spiritual momentum that lifts the soul through countless lifetimes. The elephant story also reminds us that even in the form of an animal, a being can live as a noble one. Enlightenment isn't reserved for the divine or the elite. It's reflected in every moment we choose love over fear, generosity over selfishness, courage over comfort. We don't need perfect conditions. We just need a willing heart. The Buddha did not awaken in one lifetime. Stories like this reveal the long journey of awakening, where in every life, he chose to love more, give more, be more than just another being trying to survive. And if an elephant could live like this, with no doctrine, no teachings, just a heart that saw clearly and acted bravely, then surely we, with our human minds and hearts, can choose that same path. 3.2. The deer who led a lost man to safety. Some stories don't begin with grandeur or end in triumph. He wasn't born to lead a kingdom or save a multitude. Instead, he simply offered help to one lost soul. A small, almost anonymous act, but one that transformed a life. In that life, the Buddha was born as a deer. He lived alone, deep within a secluded forest where few human footsteps ever reached. He was not the leader of a herd, nor remarkable in strength or stature. But this deer carried something rare, an unshakable calm, a quiet presence that softened even the most hardened hearts. No one knew where he came from, but those who glimpsed him never forgot his eyes that seemed to hold both boundless compassion and a clear understanding beyond the world of beasts. One day, a hunter became lost in the very forest the deer called home. He had been tracking game for the royal court, as he often did, when he realized he'd strayed too far. His food was gone. His water had run out. Days passed, and hope faded. At first, he tried to climb trees to scout a path or build fires to signal for help. But the forest was too dense. Eventually, he collapsed at the base of a tree, exhausted, afraid, and utterly alone. That was when the deer appeared. At first, he stood at a distance, simply watching. He wasn't fearful. It was as if he was listening, not to words, but to the silent language of suffering. When he saw that this man, once a threat to his kind, was now just another being in pain, the deer walked forward. The deer turned and began to walk, then paused and looked back. The man hesitated, unsure whether to follow. But deep within, something stirred, a sense of trust he hadn't felt in years. He stood, and step by step, followed the deer. Their path wound through thick undergrowth, along dried riverbeds, across treacherous slopes. The man said nothing. The deer made no sound. But a silent connection formed between them, two lives once separated by fear, now joined by a shared journey. By dusk, they reached a narrow trail that led toward the distant village. The deer stopped, held the man's gaze for one long moment, then disappeared into the forest shadows. The hunter returned home changed. He told his story to anyone who would listen, but few believed him. A deer that guides humans to safety? Nonsense, they said. And yet, he left hunting behind. He became a farmer, a potter, a quiet man. In the marketplace, people would sometimes hear him speak of the deer with human eyes, the only being who had ever looked at him without judgment, as if seeing something more than what he had done. This tale, preserved in the Jataka teachings, isn't just a fable. It is a lesson in compassion, not only for those we love, but even for those who once caused us harm. The deer, a past life of the Buddha, didn't run or retaliate. He saw suffering in the hunter and responded, not out of duty, but from a heart already free from hatred. In Buddhism, compassion isn't weakness. It is clarity. It is the strength to see through actions to the soul behind them. Everyone makes mistakes, but without someone willing to offer a hand, the lost will remain lost. In today's world, indifference is becoming normal, while kindness is mistaken for naivety. But if we can carry just a bit of the deer's compassion, willing to help even those who've wronged us, then we plant seeds not only of healing for others, but of liberation for ourselves. And perhaps, like that hunter long ago, each of us has once been lost. Perhaps someone showed us a way out, not with force, but with grace. And maybe one day, it will be our turn to return to the forest, turn around, and become the guide for another soul wandering in the dark. 3.3. The monkey who gave away his fruit. Generosity doesn't only belong to the wealthy. Compassion isn't reserved for those who have plenty to spare. Sometimes, it's in the most barren corners of life, amidst hunger and struggle, that the brightest light of selflessness shines through. In one of his distant past lives, the Buddha was born as a monkey, a small creature deep in the wilderness, yet one whose heart held an immeasurable capacity for care. In a dry, rocky forest where fruit trees were scarce and rivers withered during the hot seasons, a troop of monkeys clung to survival. Food was hard to find. The sun scorched the treetops. The monkeys had to climb high and search far just to gather a few pieces of ripe fruit. During the long droughts, every bite was precious. It was a time when even the closest of kin could turn competitive. But among them lived a quiet monkey, unassuming and gentle. Though not the leader of the group, he was respected for his calm presence and kind ways. He often ate last. If he found a second fruit, he would share it with the weaker ones. His dignity wasn't loud, but it was steady, like a quiet stream flowing through the harsh forest. That monkey, unknown to others, was a past incarnation of the Buddha. One day, a lone traveler, perhaps a pilgrim or a merchant, lost his way in the forest. He had wandered far from any path and was now completely disoriented. Days passed without food. Exhausted, dehydrated, and on the verge of collapse, he slumped beneath a tree, body trembling with weakness, eyes too dry to weep. The troop of monkeys noticed the man but kept their distance, wary of humans. Yet the gentle monkey approached, slowly and deliberately. In his hand was the only fruit he had managed to find that day, just one. He had searched since dawn and had not eaten a single bite. Quietly, he placed the fruit beside the man, then backed away and watched. The traveler was barely conscious, but the scent of the fruit stirred something in him. He opened his eyes to see a monkey looking on, not with fear or caution, but with something strangely familiar, concern. Slowly, he reached for the fruit and ate. Life returned to his limbs. His heart beat steadier, and when he looked back to thank his unexpected savior, the monkey was already gone, back to the forest, back to the search for food not for himself, but for his troop. This story, preserved in the Jataka tales, wasn't meant to glorify heroism or dramatic sacrifice. Its power lies in its quiet truth. The greatest generosity comes not from surplus, but from the willingness to give when you have very little. When someone still hungry offers their last bite, they're not just giving food, they're giving life, hope, and the reminder that kindness still exists in this world. In our modern lives, we often tell ourselves that we'll give when we have enough money, time, stability. But maybe enough never arrives. Maybe it's not about waiting for abundance, but awakening the abundance within. If a monkey, wild, hungry, and unnoticed, can still give to a stranger who may never repay him, then surely we, with our awareness and choices, can do the same. Giving doesn't have to be grand. A kind word, a quiet presence, a simple act of care at the right moment. These are gifts that ripple through time. When we give from compassion, we water the seeds of goodness in ourselves. And one day, those seeds blossom into the fruits of peace, not only for others, but for our own path toward liberation. True generosity is not a loss. It is the expansion of the heart. And when the heart expands, the world is no longer a place of scarcity and struggle, but one of connection and boundless love. 3.4. The bird who saved a man but was shot. There are things we do in life that no one sees. Good deeds we plant that seem to bring no reward. Sometimes, they even bring misfortune. But according to the Buddha's teachings, wholesome karma, once created, never disappears. It may take time. It may remain unseen for lifetimes. But like a seed lying dormant in the soil, it waits for the right conditions to bloom. In one distant past life, the Buddha was born as a small bird. It was a modest creature living in the grasslands, close to human paths, yet rarely noticed. It didn't have dazzling feathers, nor a song that stood out. A being humble and almost invisible, but not without meaning. One day, a merchant lost his way while traveling through that vast land. Separated from his caravan, he accidentally fell into a hidden pit, its mouth camouflaged by leaves and dry grass. He cried for help, but no one heard. As the sun began to dip below the horizon, despair settled in. In his mind, death had already begun its slow approach. Flying overhead, the little bird caught sight of the struggling figure in the pit. It couldn't pull the man out. It had no strength, no tools. But instead of flying away, pretending it had seen nothing, it changed direction, darting toward the path where the merchant's group had last traveled. No one understood the bird's strange behavior at first. It swooped low, called out loudly, circled again and again, then flew back toward the pit, as if trying to lead the way. Eventually, one person in the caravan noticed. Out of curiosity, they followed. Thanks to that bird, they found the missing merchant, exhausted but alive. He was rescued and rejoined the caravan. He owed his life to a creature that didn't expect anything in return. But then came the tragedy. Nearby, a hunter who had been watching thought the bird must have found prey. It kept circling one spot. After all, unaware of what had just happened, the hunter raised his bow, took aim, and released the arrow. The bird was struck and died instantly. There was no funeral, no grave, no one to mourn. The merchant, upon learning what had happened, wept quietly. But the bird, who was the Buddha in a previous life, did not die in vain. In later teachings, the Buddha would recall this life as a reminder. Some good deeds won't bring joy immediately. They may even be followed by suffering. But that does not mean the good is lost. Often, it's because unwholesome karma from the past is still unfolding. When negative karma is still bearing fruit, positive actions must wait their turn. But they do not disappear. Karma, like the law of gravity, never ceases to operate. It simply moves according to its own rhythm. Think of it like lighting a small candle in a dark room. The darkness doesn't vanish at once, but the light still spreads. Gently, patiently. That is the path of good karma. Quiet, unhurried, and inevitable. This story often raises a question in people's minds. If doing good led to death, was it worth it? But that very question reveals the limits of our ordinary vision. We tend to judge actions by their immediate effects, expecting reward like one expects fruit the day after sowing a seed. Yet the universe has its own timing. Karma flows through lifetimes, and selfless actions echo far beyond what the eye can see. The bird may have died, but the merchant lived, and that life was not wasted. Later, in another lifetime, he would become a benefactor to a spiritual teacher, and eventually encounter the Buddha again after his enlightenment. The web of karma stretches across centuries, connecting beings through invisible threads only the awakened can see. And us, here and now, need only remember this. Goodness doesn't need to be dramatic. It doesn't need recognition. It doesn't require reward. If your heart stirs at the sight of suffering, and you act not for praise but simply because you cannot ignore the pain, then a seed of great merit has been planted. Whether it bears fruit in this life or the next, it will surely bloom. Merit is never lost. Kindness is never wasted. 3. 5. The poor woman who offered her last bowl of porridge. Not everyone begins life at the same starting point. Some are born into wealth, while others open their eyes into hardship. But in the eyes of the Dharma, what makes a person noble is not how much they possess, but how they use their heart in the circumstances they're given. The story of a poor woman who offered her final bowl of porridge to a wandering monk is a timeless reminder of that truth. Long ago, in a distant land, there lived a poor woman in a small thatched hut on the riverbank. She had no husband, no children, no land. She survived by gathering firewood and wild herbs to trade for small handfuls of rice. Each meal was a small miracle, earned through sweat and patience. One day, after nearly 2 days without eating, she managed to scrape together the last bit of rice she had. She cooked it into a thin porridge, just enough to warm her body and silence the hunger. As the steam rose gently from the clay pot, she prepared to eat. Just then, the sound of footsteps approached. A young monk in worn robes, holding his alms bowl, was walking nearby on his daily round for food. Their eyes met. No words were exchanged. But in that brief moment, something stirred deep within the woman's heart. Not fear, not obligation, only a pure, unexplainable reverence. With both hands, she lifted the bowl of porridge and offered it to him. The monk received the bowl silently, not because he was hungry, but because he understood the weight of her offering. She, who clearly needed this food more than he did, gave it willingly, not out of hope for merit or fear of karma, but simply because she recognized something sacred in the act of giving itself. That day, the woman did not eat, and yet, she felt no emptiness. On the contrary, she experienced a lightness, a peace she had never known before. It was not the result of receiving, but of release, from fear, from attachment, from the grip of scarcity. A few days later, a great storm swept through the region. Her fragile hut collapsed, and the woman passed away quietly. But according to the Jataka tales, in the very moment of her death, her spirit was reborn in the heavenly realm of Tishita, a place reserved for those of pure heart and virtuous deeds. She left behind no wealth, no legacy in the worldly sense, but she left a teaching more powerful than gold, that true offerings come not from the hands, but from the heart. A bowl of porridge may be small to some, but if it is everything one has, given in purity, it becomes the most exalted of gifts. In Buddhist teachings, merit is not measured by quantity, but by the intention behind the act. The woman gave not from abundance, but from the depths of lack, and it was precisely that which made her virtue vast. Today, we often ask ourselves, what do I have to give? But perhaps the better question is, do I have enough compassion to share what little I do have? No one is ever too poor to give. Even a kind word, a warm smile, a quiet gesture of care, these are also offerings. Sometimes, in the very moment we believe we have nothing left, we discover our greatest wealth, not in possessions, but in the boundless capacity of the heart to love, to give, and to be free. Part 4. Lives of Wisdom. When the Buddha was a sage, ascetic, or king. 4. 1. The sage who was wrongfully judged, but remained calm. Not all of the Buddha's past lives were marked by dramatic sacrifices or royal grandeur. Some were quiet, contemplative, and profoundly powerful in their simplicity, showing how inner wisdom can shine without the need for recognition, and how true equanimity holds firm even under injustice. In one distant lifetime, the Bodhisattva was born as a forest sage. He lived a humble, solitary life near the outskirts of a great kingdom, though he had no titles or wealth. His name spread far and wide due to his deep understanding, serene presence, and unwavering compassion. Those who sought wisdom would journey to sit by his side, receiving guidance not just through words, but through the calm radiance of his being. But as with all things in samsara, even the wise are not spared from slander. One day, a disgraced court official, seeking to reclaim favor, accused the sage of using sorcery to manipulate the king and cause disorder in the court. Fueled by fear, suspicion, and political ambition, the accusation spread rapidly. Whispers turned to demands, and soon the pressure on the king became unbearable. Though reluctant, the king ordered the sage to be brought before the royal court, but quietly distant, as if what was happening no longer pertained to him. Before the court, the king asked, "Do you have anything to say in your defense?" The sage replied softly, "Those who understand need no explanation. Those who do not will not be convinced by words." His calm unsettled many. Some thought him arrogant. Others were shaken. How could one so still and clear-eyed be guilty of dark magic? But laws had been set in motion. The sage was sentenced to exile in a remote and desolate land. Years passed. The kingdom suffered drought, war, and strange omens. Restless, the king dreamed one night of the sage sitting in a field, his heart emitting light that spread across the land. Upon waking, the king sent his men to find him. They discovered the sage in a small grass hut, still alive, teaching children and helping the sick. He had never once cursed his fate. When brought before the king, he bowed gently, showing no trace of bitterness or blame. "I was wrong," the king admitted. But the sage simply smiled. "Truth needs no defense," he said. "It is like the moon, hidden behind clouds, but never lost. When the clouds pass, it shines again." He declined honors, riches, and titles, choosing instead to return to his simple life in the forest. This story has been preserved through generations as a testament to the power of patience, not as passive suffering, but as the strength that arises from deep insight. True wisdom does not rush to defend itself because it sees beyond the immediate storm. It recognizes that praise and blame are but passing clouds. This sage, quiet and unmoved by injustice, was none other than a past life of the Buddha. And the great lesson here is this: wisdom does not need to argue, and peace of mind does not rely on circumstances. No ties to any kingdom or family. His only companions were a small stone hut, the whisper of the wind, and the sound of melting snow trickling through mountain creeks. This man, one of the Buddha's many past incarnations, had spent years in meditation and contemplation, dwelling in silence, dissolving his mind into the vastness of awareness. In that stillness, he emerged from meditation and stepped out into the cold air. Closing his eyes, he turned his attention downward, toward a valley far below where a small village lay nestled. Through his inner vision, he saw that the people were suffering. A strange illness had swept through the village. Children were falling ill, the elderly were dying, and there was no help. Cut off from the world, the villagers had no medicine, no aid, and no hope. Standing there in the snow, he hesitated. To descend the mountain meant leaving behind the perfect conditions for meditation. It meant returning to the world of distraction and noise, of attachment and illusion, a world he had spent years rising above. But then, a thought as soft as the wind passed through his heart. If wisdom cannot be used to help others, what is it for? The next morning, he quietly packed his few belongings and began the long journey down the mountain. It was not a retreat from spiritual practice, but a step forward in the path of compassion. He understood, true awakening is not found in escape, but in bringing the light of insight into the world of suffering. When he arrived at the village, he did not speak of the Dharma, nor reveal himself as a hermit from the highlands. He simply began helping. He nursed the sick, gathered healing herbs, taught villagers how to boil water and keep clean, and spoke gently to calm their fear. His presence brought order where there was panic, and peace where there was despair. Wherever he walked, children began to smile, and adults found courage again. In time, the sickness faded. The village slowly recovered. No one knew who he really was. They simply called him the teacher from the mountains. When asked why he had come, he replied, "I heard suffering voices." Before long, he quietly left the village and returned to his mountain home. But this time, his solitude was no longer an escape. His heart had opened, and his understanding had deepened. It is not yet true liberation. For as the hermit once understood, when the heart opens wide, every step into the world becomes a step toward enlightenment. 4. 3. The king who gave up his throne to pursue the spiritual path. In one of his distant past lives, the Buddha was born as a wise and virtuous king, ruling over a prosperous and peaceful kingdom. Under his leadership, justice prevailed, the people thrived, and no shadow of corruption touched his court. Revered not only for his intelligence, but also for his compassion and spiritual depth. He witnessed the suffering of his people, birth, aging, illness, and death. He saw beloved ministers fall ill and die, heard the wails of grieving families, and watched as border wars brought pain to even the most distant corners of his realm. These sights stirred something profound in his heart. And one moonlit night, as he walked alone through the royal garden, a question arose within him. Even if I rule 1,000 kingdoms, I cannot escape death. So what, then, is the true purpose of this life? That question split through the illusion like a flash of lightning. The next morning, in a full court session attended by all his ministers, the king made a stunning declaration. He would abdicate the throne. The royal hall fell into stunned silence. No one understood why a man who had everything would willingly give it all up. But the king knew. Authority and riches are but illusions. One can govern a land and still be a prisoner of the mind. He passed the crown to a noble and capable successor. Then, without ceremony or lavish farewells, he shed his royal robes and donned the simple garments of a monk. No golden chariot, no entourage, just a begging bowl and bare feet, setting out on the road to truth. He traveled through forests, climbed mountains, and lived in caves. He learned from sages and hermits, meditated under trees, endured hunger and storms. There were moments of great hardship, but never did he complain. Each step stripped away another layer of ego, of attachment, of illusion. The further he walked from his former life, the closer he drew to liberation. Through perseverance and deep resolve, it is a timeless reminder that what we think we own may in fact own us. And true peace begins the moment we dare to let go. In today's world, most of us are not kings. But each of us has a throne of sorts, whether it's status, ambition, pride, or the expectations of others. Sometimes, only by stepping down from it can we truly hear the voice of our inner self. Known far and wide not only for his business acumen, but also for his honesty, he never cheated a single customer, not even in the smallest transaction. Despite his vast riches, he lived simply, wore coarse robes, ate humble meals, and slept on a bamboo mat. To him, wealth was merely a tool, not a destination. One day, news reached him of a distant monastery on the brink of collapse. The monks there were starving. They had neither enough food nor proper robes. That very morning, the merchant departed with a portion of his wealth to offer aid. But when he arrived, he was deeply moved by what he saw. Monks thin from hunger, bowls of rice divided among several people, and an air of quiet endurance. That night, he sat in meditation. He sent a message back to his family and associates. Sell everything, my homes, warehouses, fields, and grain reserves. Leave nothing behind. Every coin earned from those sales, he donated to the monastery and to the villagers nearby. When his family worried he would be left with nothing, he simply smiled and said, I don't fear losing possessions, helping the poor, and showing children how to read and write. Though he had no wealth, his heart overflowed with joy and meaning. One person once asked him, why give away everything you worked your whole life for? He replied, the wealth we keep will one day be left behind when we die, but the merit we generate will follow us beyond this life. This story has been passed down for generations as a shining example of ultimate generosity, not for praise, not for recognition, but from a deep and fearless spirit of letting go. A form of giving that comes from wisdom, knowing that material things are impermanent, while kindness and merit are the seeds that blossom across lifetimes. Today, in a world obsessed with accumulation, it's easy to measure a person's value by their bank account or belongings. But the story of this noble merchant reminds us of a deeper truth. When we give with a sincere heart, we may find that we are the ones who receive the most in return. 4.5. The Bodhisattva was deceived, but held no resentment. In a distant past life, the Bodhisattva was born as a wise scholar, deeply compassionate, and known throughout a small forest-side town. People respected him not only for his profound knowledge, but also for his gentle, generous heart. He was always ready to help anyone in need, no matter how dire their situation. One day, a poor traveler from a faraway village arrived, trembling, wearing tattered clothes, with despair written in his eyes. Falling to his knees, the man pleaded with the scholar, claiming that his family was starving and on the brink of death, and paper, and handed it all to the man. Tears welled up in the man's eyes. He stammered his thanks, bowed repeatedly, and quickly left. Weeks later, however, someone who wandered from village to village, pretending to be destitute in order to gather money, then spent it lavishly on pleasures and indulgence. The townspeople were outraged. Some urged the bodhisattva to report the deception to the local magistrate to recover his gold. Others shook their heads, saying he had been too trusting and naive. Then my compassion would have had conditions. And true compassion is unconditional. He made no effort to find the deceiver. He bore no grudge, no anger, and felt no sense of loss. Instead, still plant seeds of merit, even if they appear to suffer loss in the moment. This story became well known throughout the region, not just because of his generosity, but because of his calm, but refusing to let wrongness poison your own heart. When this story was later told and retold, one message echoed above all. True compassion does not demand fairness, it transcends it. It heals. In today's world, where kindness is often questioned and those taken advantage of may turn cold and cynical, the tale of this bodhisattva offers a quiet reminder. Give with an open heart. And if that gift is betrayed, remember, karma belongs to each of us alone, and your compassion remains whole. That is the wisdom of one who has journeyed through countless lifetimes and come to know that a heart free from hatred is the path to true liberation. Part 5. Lives of emotion, karmic ties of love, resentment, and family bonds. 5. 1. The mother who abandoned her child and had to find them again in the next life to make amends. In a quiet town nestled in the Bavarian countryside of southern Germany during the 19th century, there lived a young woman named Elise Kramer. Raised in a devout and rigid household, she was taught that family honor was everything, and to break from tradition was to be cast into shame. At the age of 17, Elise committed what was considered a disgrace at the time. She became pregnant out of wedlock. When her family discovered the truth, they disowned her. The villagers turned their backs, and the once welcoming world around her closed in. In desperation, Elise gave birth in a secluded forest monastery, and, unable to raise the child on her own, left her newborn at the church doorstep, hoping someone with a kind heart would raise the baby. She didn't look back. She never gave the child a name. She never returned. Elise went on with her life. Outwardly, she rebuilt her reputation, married a respected man, had 2 more sons, and was eventually seen as a proper mother and respectable woman. Yet at night, she could not escape a lingering ache, a quiet whisper of guilt, a persistent pull of something left undone. Her prayers and confessions could not erase it. Somewhere deep within her, Elise knew that a bond had been severed, and that bond still lived. At 53, she died of a lung disease. To most, her story had ended. But karma does not end with death. A century later, in Canada, wrapped in a cloth that smelled faintly of candle wax and incense, hearing distant church bells echo through the cold air. She was sensitive, warm-hearted, and deeply intuitive, but always felt like something was missing. At 38, Marianne took a pilgrimage to Europe. She traveled through Germany and, for reasons she couldn't explain, felt inexplicably drawn to a small, ancient chapel in the Bavarian woods. The moment she stepped inside, her heart raced. Everything seemed strangely familiar. That night, she dreamed of a young woman in a wool dress, standing alone in the snow, gently placing a baby on the church steps and walking away in tears. The dream repeated itself for 3 nights. One morning, she met an elderly caretaker named Greta, who maintained the chapel grounds. Over tea, Marianne shared her dream. Greta listened quietly, then led her to the chapel's small archive. Together, they pulled an old logbook from the shelves. Greta turned to a page and read softly. December 14th, 1862, an unnamed infant found on the church steps, possibly left by a woman called Elise K. Marianne's chest tightened. Over the following weeks, she traced Elise's life, visiting cemeteries and reading records, writing down impressions in her journal. Through meditation and past life regression, a truth slowly emerged. Marianne was the child that Elise had abandoned. Elise was her own past life. In this lifetime, Marianne had no children of her own, but she felt called to help others. She founded a center for abandoned and orphaned children, dedicating herself to healing the very wound she had once inflicted. But we cannot erase what hasn't been reconciled. Sometimes, it is the next life that gives us the chance to return, to forgive, to atone, to complete what was left unfinished. 5. 2. The betraying friend reborn as an animal to repay his karma. In 12th century Venice, Italy, two childhood friends, Matteo and Luca, grew up together among the emerald canals. They shared loaves of bread, passed old books between them, and dreamed of one day running a fabric business that would span across Europe. Matteo was quiet, honest, and thoughtful. Luca, by contrast, it flourished. But prosperity brought temptation. As their trade began to turn profitable, Luca slowly changed. Behind Matteo's back, he altered the ledgers, registered assets under his own name, and eventually accused Matteo of embezzling gold from their joint funds. Matteo was arrested, disgraced, and banished from the merchant district. He lost everything: his reputation, his livelihood, his home. For 5 years, he wandered in silence and shame before dying alone. Luca continued to enjoy wealth and status. But at night, he was haunted by dreams of a sorrowful dog staring at him. Always at a distance, always following. The dog never barked, never growled, just watched, with eyes full of quiet grief. Luca lived for several more decades, yet a shadow remained over his heart. A puppy named Brio was born in a barn. No one could explain why the pup had such soulful, human-like eyes. Brio was exceptionally intelligent, yet loyal only to one person, an old man named Pietro, who lived alone on the outskirts of the village. What no one knew was that Pietro was the rebirth of Matteo. Brio followed Pietro everywhere, to the fish market, through the fields. This was more than devotion. It was a silent act of atonement from a soul that had once betrayed his dearest friend. This tale never made it into the history books, but lived on in whispers, as proof that betrayal leaves deep imprints on the soul. A wound in the conscience can echo across many lifetimes. And some souls, once they've tasted the pain they once caused, return in the humblest of forms, to serve, to protect, and to repay their karmic debt. Brio could not speak apologies, but through every gentle lick, every loyal gaze, and every quiet step behind Pietro, perhaps that soul said everything that needed to be said. And Pietro, though he remembered nothing of the past, may have forgiven it all. 5. 3. The jealous wife who met her former husband again in a new form. In the ancient city of Kyoto during Japan's Edo period, there lived a married couple named Akiko and Haruto. They had fallen in love as teenagers, their bond blossoming with the purity of youthful affection. Haruto, a gentle and learned man, worked at a temple library, while Akiko, the daughter of a merchant family, was refined, well-educated, but emotionally fragile and intensely sensitive. From the moment they were married, Akiko was plagued by fear that she would lose Haruto's love if he so much as spoke too long with another woman in the village, or returned home a little later than usual. And manipulation meant to provoke guilt in her husband. After nearly 10 years of this turmoil, Haruto could bear no more. He left their home, renounced the world, and became a monk, living out the rest of his life in solitude among the mountains. Akiko remained alone for many years, though she later regretted how things ended. She never truly understood why her love had pushed her beloved away. Even on her deathbed, confusion and sorrow lingered in her heart. And so, she died, but the emotional karma did not. Centuries passed. In present-day Vancouver, a young woman named Naomi grew up feeling deeply attuned to the emotions of others. In love, she was passionate, but plagued by an inexplicable fear of abandonment. Even in stable relationships, she found herself overcome by jealousy, needing reassurance constantly, reacting with suspicion and panic when things felt even slightly uncertain. Then one day, Naomi met Riku, a gentle, quiet man newly arrived from Japan. They crossed paths at a calligraphy exhibit, and from the first moment, Naomi felt a strange familiarity she couldn't explain. Their bond grew quickly, as if they had known each other forever. But months into their relationship, Naomi's old patterns returned. She began watching Riku closely, analyzing his words and actions for signs of betrayal that weren't there. Though Riku remained calm and kind, she accused, cried, and questioned, until one evening, after a particularly painful fight, Riku simply stood up, walked out, and never came back. Naomi was devastated, desperate for clarity and peace. She enrolled in a meditation retreat at a Buddhist center. During a deep session of guided meditation, she experienced a vivid vision, herself dressed in a traditional kimono, weeping inside a wooden house in Kyoto. Outside, a man in monk's robes walked away into the rain. She recognized him. It was Riku. When the session ended, Naomi broke down in tears. It all made sense. In a distant lifetime, she had been Akiko. Riku had been Haruto. She had never apologized. She had never healed. But now, they had met again in this lifetime, and she had repeated the same pattern of control, fear, and unresolved emotion. Naomi didn't reach out to Riku again. Instead, she began a journey inward. She studied her emotions, practiced mindfulness, and devoted herself to helping other young women struggling with toxic attachment. Every time she listened to someone share their fear of losing love, emotional karma doesn't disappear, it transforms. It reshapes itself into new faces, new stories, and new opportunities, gently asking, "Have you learned what love truly means yet?" 5. He followed the sound and discovered a small child, frail, dressed in rags, lips cracked from dehydration, eyes wide with fear and exhaustion. The child's stomach was swollen from hunger, and he could barely lift his hand to beg for help. There had been a severe famine in the region. After multiple failed harvests, many villagers fled or abandoned loved ones they could no longer feed. This child was one of those left behind, nameless, voiceless, unseen by the world. The hermit knew he didn't have much. His only food for the day was a handful of coarse rice offered by a villager the day before. But without hesitation, he took that food and fed the child, spoonful by spoonful. He washed the child's face with stream water, wrapped his own robe around the small shivering body, and stayed beside him throughout the cold night. The child survived. A few days later, when he regained strength, a villager agreed to take him in. The hermit returned to his forest and resumed his quiet spiritual practice, never imagining that this small act of kindness would ripple across lifetimes. Many cycles of rebirth passed. In the Buddha's final human incarnation, when he was born as Prince Siddhartha Gautama in the Lumbini Garden, he came into the world through Queen Maya and King Suddhodana. But few know this hidden truth. The soul that chose to be born as the Buddha's son in this life was that very child whom the poor hermit had once saved. 7 days after Siddhartha's birth, Queen Maya passed away and was said to be reborn in the heavenly realms. In her place stepped another mother, Queen Mahaprajapati Gautami, Maya's younger sister, who raised Siddhartha with profound love and care. That was the same soul, now returned, not as a helpless child, but as a guiding presence in the Buddha's early life. It only takes a bowl of rice, given with pure intention, to sow the seeds that grow into a spiritual companion of a future Buddha. Sometimes, the quiet help we offer, when no one else is watching, becomes the light that leads a soul through lifetimes of darkness. And sometimes, the one we help today, voiceless, fragile, and with nothing to offer in return, may one day become a bodhisattva themselves. 5.5. The one who stole others' light and was never recognized. In Florence, Italy, during the flourishing Renaissance of the 16th century, there lived a young painter named Alonso. He was a student of the highly respected master Lorenzo da Castello, a man known not only for his exceptional artistic skill, but also for his gentle heart and moral clarity. Alonso had talent, no doubt, but his gift was constantly shadowed by an insatiable hunger for fame. He was caught in a constant spiral of comparison, always feeling overlooked. A quiet crack formed in his heart, one filled with envy toward his own teacher. One day, Lorenzo was commissioned to paint a large mural for the city's cathedral. Trusting his student, He asked Alonso to assist with the background and supporting details. But late one night, when left alone in the chapel, Alonso secretly altered some of the central elements, subtle changes, meant to make the most brilliant parts of the painting seem like his own. When rumors began to spread that Alonso had contributed more than expected, Lorenzo found out, but chose not to expose him. He simply said, "One who steals light from others loses the light within." Shortly after, the master quietly left Florence and retreated into a remote monastery, giving up public acclaim. Alonso, on the other hand, rose in popularity. Yet strangely, no one remembered him long. His paintings were technically sound, but said to lack soul. No matter how hard he tried, he could never surpass the glow of a truth he had once betrayed. When he died, Alonso's soul did not ascend to the higher realms. Instead, it wandered through many lifetimes, carrying with it a strange unease, as though he was constantly being hidden from the light, no matter how brightly he tried to shine. Centuries later, in modern-day London, a young woman named Elise worked in creative advertising. She was intelligent, diligent, and naturally intuitive. But strangely, she was repeatedly overlooked. Her ideas often ended up being credited to others. She became known as the one behind the scenes, never the star. Though praised for her reliability, no one ever truly elevated her to where she deserved to be. Frustrated, Elise switched companies, even industries, but the pattern followed her. A deep sense of unfairness and self-doubt crept in. She began to wonder if she was simply unlucky. Everything changed when she joined a regression meditation session and saw a vivid vision, a young man in a paint-stained robe, standing alone in a dimly lit chapel, altering another man's masterpiece. That face, it was hers, in another form, another time. After the session, Elise sat in silence for a long time. A simple truth echoed in her mind. Light cannot be stolen. It can only be borrowed, and eventually, must be returned. From that day on, Elise stopped complaining. She stopped chasing recognition and started building her inner self. She shared her ideas freely, without fear. She trusted that what was truly hers would never be taken away. And what she had once taken unjustly, she now repaid with quiet growth and humility. Karma does not punish, but karma is precise. It records even the most subtle imprints in our consciousness to teach us this. Light is not something you take from others. It only appears when your own heart becomes clear enough to hold it. 1. No action is ever lost. Everything leaves a trace. Across hundreds of the Buddha's past life stories, from when he was a humble animal in the forest to his lives as sages, kings, merchants, one invisible thread runs through them all. Every action, no matter how small, leaves a trace in the stream of consciousness. Karma is not a divine ledger keeping score of sins and virtues. It is not about punishment. It is not enforced by some higher power. Karma is simply the natural result of intentional actions, like seeds planted in soil. The earth does not choose. Whatever is sown, when the conditions are right, will grow into its exact kind. In every lifetime, we sow countless karmic seeds, through thoughts, words, and actions. Some are seeds of kindness. Once we understand this, we stop asking, "Why do bad things happen to me?" and begin to ask, "What am I planting today?" When we pause and reflect, we forget the silent resentment we carried. We forget the good deeds we gave up on because we didn't see results fast enough. But the universe forgets nothing. But the same is true for good. Every time we listen with care, every moment we stay calm in anger, every time we show compassion without needing recognition, we are quietly planting seeds of awakening. Nothing is ever lost. Nothing is ever forgotten. Nothing is ever meaningless in the realm of karma. 6.2. Can karma be transformed? Many people, upon learning about karma, begin to feel fear. They worry that the wrongdoings of the past, whether in this life or previous ones, will inevitably lead to suffering. Some ask, if karma has already been created, how can anything be changed? The answer is, karma can be transformed, but not through mere prayer or wishful thinking. Only through understanding, mindfulness, and sincere actions from the heart. Like a seed. A good seed may struggle to bloom if watered with selfishness or anger. Transforming karma is a way of living differently, beginning right now. One of the most essential paths to transformation is mindfulness. When the mind is illuminated by awareness, we begin to see clearly our own patterns of ignorance, how we speak without care, how we chase status, how we quietly judge others. And in that moment of recognition, we stop. We no longer react on autopilot. We don't let anger drive our choices. Can lighten the weight we carry in our consciousness. The most powerful path, however, is doing good from a pure place. Not to erase karma, not to buy merit, but because we have come to understand. Only light dissolves darkness. Only love heals wounds. When we help someone quietly, forgive someone who has hurt us, or simply hold compassion in a chaotic world, we are not just doing good. There are many who've committed great harm in the past. Those who have broken laws, wounded others, lived in anger. Yet when they truly repent, dedicate themselves to service, and live mindfully, they not only transform themselves, but become a light for others. This is not karma disappearing. It is karma being transformed into a path of awakening. The universe is not rigid. Karma is not a life sentence. Every good deed done today can soften the weight of yesterday. And if the heart is sincere, nothing is beyond redemption. 6.3. How to know which karma is ripening. When we first encounter the teachings on karma, it's natural to wonder, how do I know which karma is ripening now? How can I tell what comes from my past actions? What is a life test? And what is the deeper lesson life is urging me to learn? The answer lies not in mysticism or speculation, but in the simple clarity of your present experience. Your life right now is the most honest reflection of the karmic forces at work. Do you repeatedly find yourself in relationships that hurt you? This may be the echo of unresolved emotional karma. Do you often feel misunderstood despite good intentions? It might stem from old patterns of speech or miscommunication. Do you live kindly and still get betrayed? That could be the delayed fruit of actions from a distant past. Whatever shows up again and again in your life, especially patterns that feel like a loop, are not coincidences. They are lessons calling you back, waiting to be seen, understood, and released. To recognize what karma is ripening, look not just at your circumstances, but at how you react to them. It's not always about what happens to you. Your reactions are what continue or dissolve karma. If you respond with anger, blame, or resistance, the old karmic will spin faster. Understanding karma isn't about labeling experiences as good or bad. It's about holding steady in wisdom and humility, no matter what comes, waiting for you to face them. And the moment you stop running, stop blaming, stop repeating the same reaction, that's when the cycle breaks. That's when the karmic imprint weakens. You no longer act from compulsion, but from awareness. You become the one who plants new seeds, not just the one who reaps the old harvest. The Buddha once said, "The mind is the forerunner of all actions. It is the maker of karma and the key to liberation." No one else needs to judge your karma. You don't need a mystic to tell you your fate. You only need to observe your own mind each day. See what causes you pain, what makes you reactive, what feels difficult to forgive. That is where karma is blooming, and your lesson is hidden within that bloom. And when you see it clearly, you can continue your path with grace. No guilt, no running, no resistance. Because karma is not punishment. It is the sacred invitation to understand yourself more deeply and take one step closer to awakening. Part 7. Conclusion: Awakening and Daily Spiritual Practice. 7. 1. The Buddha became enlightened because he learned from the same suffering as we do. One essential truth is often forgotten. The Buddha was not born enlightened. He, too, was once just a human being. He went through countless cycles of birth and death. He made mistakes, felt heartbreak, knew joy and despair, wandered in confusion, and searched for meaning, just like us. His path to awakening was not some celestial shortcut for the divine, but a deeply human journey from darkness to light. He lived lives as a selfless elephant, a deer who guided the lost, a wise sage wrongfully accused, a king who renounced his throne, a merchant who gave away all he owned to save the poor. He was also a mother, a friend, a betrayed soul, and a seeker who failed and learned again. Through hundreds, thousands of lifetimes, he observed, learned, repented, and transformed. His pain did not break him. It shaped the steps that led him toward liberation. And this is the most powerful reminder for all of us. You can begin the path of awakening right now, not in a future life, not when you're more spiritual, right here, in the messiness of your existence. Amid deadlines, family tensions, unhealed wounds, and unresolved regrets, you can begin. You don't need to leave everything and become a monk. You don't need to become a saint. If you can simply pause, just for a moment, and look deeply at your suffering. Ask yourself, what am I still clinging to? Listen sincerely to someone you've hurt, or choose silence over rage. That is already spiritual practice. The Buddha became the Buddha not through supernatural powers, but because he learned to look directly at reality with awakened eyes. He didn't chase after heavens or escape from the world. He found liberation in each thought, each breath, each mindful step. His enlightenment was not a sudden light from above, but the quiet result of countless choices, to understand instead of blame, to forgive instead of hate, to love instead of close the heart. If we can view the Buddha not just as a distant figure, but as a mirror for our own potential, we begin to see suffering differently. It is not our enemy. It is the gate to insight. Every crack in the heart is a space for light to enter. Every hardship we've endured is fertile ground where compassion can grow. And when we start living differently, even in the smallest ways, not resenting this moment, not punishing ourselves for the past, not fearing the future, then we are already walking the path of awakening. You don't need to wait for enlightenment. Just begin with kindness to yourself. 2. The shortest path to create good karma: words, thoughts, and small daily actions. When we hear about good karma, many people imagine something grand, helping the poor, building temples. It begins with the smallest things in daily life: a gentle word, a kind thought, an action that avoids causing harm. Every word is a seed. You can plant comfort or pain, hope or despair, love or resentment, just by opening your mouth. A kind sentence, spoken at the right time, can save someone from emotional collapse. A careless, angry remark can leave a scar that lasts for years. So, karma is not just made through actions, it begins with speech. Next comes thoughts, invisible, yet the most powerful force. A person may appear kind on the outside, but if their heart is full of jealousy, resentment, or ego, that energy still radiates. On the other hand, someone who is quiet and reserved, yet nurtures a pure, loving inner world, generates peace around them. In Buddhism, mental karma is the root of all actions, because the mind is the forerunner of all things. To think kindly is already to plant good seeds. Then come actions, but these need not be dramatic. It could be helping an elder cross the street, smiling at someone who looks tired, staying calm when provoked, or forgiving someone who has wronged you. It could be as subtle as holding back from saying something cruel, not gossiping with the crowd, or choosing not to judge too quickly. Each of these small. I don't have the means to do good. But the truth is, we have countless chances every single day. Opportunities to be silent when angry, to withhold judgment, to offer a kind word, to see someone else's pain with compassion. All of these are acts of goodness. And the beauty is, they are not bound by your status, wealth, or background. Whether rich or poor, successful or struggling, anyone can plant seeds of goodness, starting now. You don't have to wait for the right moment to do good. You don't need money to help others. A kind heart is enough. From that, your words, thoughts, and actions will naturally carry clarity and warmth. If you live with awareness, each day becomes part of the shortest, less harmful to yourself and others. That, in itself, is the path. Because the greatest good karma doesn't come from a single grand gesture. It comes from 1,000 small choices, made with mindfulness and love. 7.3. Conclusion. Every human being carries an unfinished story. A part of the past has quietly passed. The present is unfolding moment by moment. And the future, still unknown, is being shaped right now by your thoughts, your words, and your actions. You don't need to wait for a distant future life to see the fruits of karma. Every way you respond to your own suffering and joy. The seeds you plant today, a kind thought, a word of forgiveness, a small act of generosity, will bloom when the time is right. And nothing is ever lost. Even if you don't see the results immediately, even if no one notices, the universe remembers. No act of goodness is wasted. No positive shift is too small. If you've ever felt life is too painful or unfair, remember this. Even the Buddha experienced all of it. Every loss, every misunderstanding, every hardship, he walked through it. But he didn't stop at suffering. He learned from it, and then rose beyond it, becoming a light for others. You can too. Within you is the seed of a Buddha. You don't have to wait until you've reached some spiritual milestone to start living well. Every breath you take is a new chance to transform. Even if yesterday was full of mistakes, you can live differently today. Even if today you still carry anger, tomorrow you can begin to let go. And if you don't know where to start, begin here. Stay silent when angry. Listen when you disagree. Be gentle with yourself. You don't need to leave the world to practice the path. You can cultivate awareness in the middle of real life, in the middle of responsibilities, pressures, and conflict. Because spiritual practice isn't about becoming someone else. It's about returning to the clearest, kindest version of who you already are. You are creating your next life in this very moment. If you long for a peaceful rebirth, a gentler world, a freer future, then live like a Buddha, starting today. You don't have to be perfect. We'll follow you when this life ends. Only the karma you've created, through thoughts, feelings, and actions, will come with you. And if that karma is made of seeds of goodness, then there's nowhere to go that you need to fear. Have you ever felt a deep sadness inside, without knowing where it came from? A sense of loneliness, of loss, of something precious that slipped away, yet you can't quite remember what it was. Have you ever met someone completely unfamiliar, yet their eyes felt achingly familiar, as if you had once known them beyond time? Or have you lived through a series of repeated events, patterns of pain and struggle that return again and again, no matter how good you are, how hard you try, how much you give? There are things in life that logic alone cannot explain. Sometimes, injustice strikes those who live